Okay, welcome to part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 75. We're going to be discussing the JFK files and how they relate to what I covered in part 1, the proof of work network, which was the resistance against the mafia-controlled mob system, of proof of weapons, which I covered in the macro section in part 2, which explains exactly how the proof of weapons network is constructed. Now, in part 3, the geopolitical section, the backbone of the proof of weapons network is controlling the flow of weapons in order to have a perpetual debt cycle Ponzi scheme, which is able to be inflicted through war, death, and destruction. And if you don't bow down to that agenda, you either get put in debt slavery and your wealth wiped out, or you get blackmailed through networks, and I'll cover some of the covert operations that we've always covered. Or if you're at the top of power and you're no longer doing what the proof of weapons network needs you to do, then you get taken out. And that's exactly what happened to JFK. So this week, the Trump administration, after a big pushback and a kerfuffle, where they said they're going to release the files because it was part of the political promise, and then they employed a Zionist cabinet that is doing the bidding of propping up the proof of weapons network. And then because of that promise, we had this big fight against it. There was delays in releasing the files. And then there were the intelligence agencies that were going through them radically and saying, you need to redact this, you need to redact that. And then eventually the files were dropped, and there were little nuggets in there that leaked because we got the collective intelligence of all of our people that were now connected, and we're able to share and crowdsource the research together. So what I want to do is I want to cover what is important that came from basically 80,000 pages of files on the JFK assassination. And many of these were already released. Some of them were released unredacted, and others had redacted files. And so you're able to reverse engineer the redacted files using the unredacted files. And there were little gems in there, which, depending on which side of the ideology, if you're a Trump guy and you think that he's here to save the world and he's the Messiah, like some people think, then you'll say, yeah, he's playing 12D chess and he allowed those nuggets to get in to expose the system. Or if you're from another side, you might say it's just incompetence, that they tried to redact as much as they could, but that actually got through. Or you could say that the proof of weapons network is changing the world order, and so therefore it wants to control the flows of capital, as I described in This Week in Bitcoin and the proof of weapons network, the macro section, in order to weaken certain elements to push other capital flows, which is what I think is more likely, is that Trump has been bought to service the agenda of the proof of weapons network, and the proof of weapons network is changing the world order. And that's why there is a slight expose on Israel, because Israel first is no longer America first. And the proof of weapons network wants to change the world order to have peace in the Middle East, which requires ending the Zionist narrative that was propped up in order to get the destabilization needed. So, redacted from the JFK files. Immediately, you have to ask yourself, who was requesting the redactions? Well, when it showed the redaction, it said who requested the redactions. And guess what? There was only one intelligence agency that requested the redactions before they were dropped. And it is the Israeli Intelligence Service, otherwise abbreviated to ISIS, which is also the funder of that group, in order to create the destabilization that is needed to destabilize the region and create the fake war on terror 2.0, which was a mind control, media control narrative to be able to justify wars to suit the military industrial complex. But what do they need you to think? They need to think it is what are the two things? The terrorists, the communists. So the terrorist narrative wasn't good enough to get there, so they pushed on the communist narrative. So if you were listening to the spaces of those agents that kind of are paid to defend Israel, which is a construct that I'm going to share with you that led to the assassination of JFK, you had lots of people talking about how Lee Harvey Oswald went and visited the Soviet Union, and it was Russia, Russia, Russia. And of course, they were fighting communism through the Cubans, and they were trying to get weapons over to the anti-Castro Cubans. Or it was the drug trafficking rings in Mexico. And they released through that the CIA was connected to it. Why? Because the people that created the JFK film, the ones that control Hollywood, were the ones that said, let's blame CIA, but let's never mention Mossad. Let's never mention that, because that is the backbone of the mob activity that led to the assassination of JFK, allegedly. And so there were lots of red herrings that tried to take you down: the Cubans, the Russians, the Mexicans, Lee Harvey Oswald. You have to just ask yourself a question. When you follow the money and understand proof of weapons, you'll never fall for that stuff. And so why would, if it was the enemies of America or the reported enemies of America, why would they cover up for them? They would have released the files right away if it was the Russians, the Soviet Unions, the Cubans, and the communists, or it was, the Mexican drug cartels. If they're the enemies, then they would have released it. So then you have to ask yourself, who was it? And then obviously you go through some of the history that we've covered in previous. And I'm going to do a recap of some of the history that helps you understand exactly what the CIA, the Mossad operations, and who's involved in the assassination of presidents. So if you have done any reading of history, this isn't exactly a secret. You will know that the CIA was created from an MI5 network at the same time as the wars, at the same time as in the shift in power from the Bank of England to the Federal Reserve, to the whole network that I covered in part 2. I'm not going to repeat it again. And that was also involved in operations for the collaboration with the CIA supporting corporate interests, with the largest interest being the mob and the mafia. And so drug trafficking was allowed to happen and all of these different things because the CIA was protecting corporate interest, not state interest. They made you think that it is state interest, but it was actually corporate interest and the proof of weapons network that we talked about in part 2. Okay, so once you know that it is very well documented because the CIA went through revealing that. And you can go onto the CIA website, you can read the declassified documents, and you know that there is controversy after controversy. The CIA they're not an America First organization. They protect corporate interests. They are a network across Britain, Israel, and UK that protect corporate interests through crimes against humanity. To give you an example, I'll just reveal some of the operations so you can stop saying I'm a conspiracy theorist, so that if we can get to 100,000 subscribers, I can show how these operations are actually already published in the public domain. To give you an idea, there was an operation Ajax, Operation Ajax. That happened in 1953. This is when the CIA overthrew Iran's democracy, and they elected a prime minister, a dictator. They overthrew it because they wanted to move the system, and they wanted to prevent the nationalization of oil, because the British government with MI6 needed the oil to create British petroleum. If you want to understand how drug trafficking actually works, again, declassified files. I'm not talking about my speculation. I've got lots of speculation because I know how these things work. I've studied them and I've followed the money. But if you want an example of a CIA-backed criminal drug trafficking declassified document, look up something called the Contra cocaine trafficking affair, 1980s. So, 45 years ago. Is that recent enough to know that this stuff still happens? CIA declassified documents that the CIA was supporting the Nicaraguan cocaine dealers who essentially trafficking drugs into America. Because the reason that cocaine got into America was because the old MI6 networks, the ones that created the opium wars, the ones that colonized India to take over the poppy fields, the opium fields, they needed those drugs to get into America because the CIA is a mafia. And so they needed the drug trafficking, and that was a declassified document, the Contra affair. They were taking that money and they were using it to earn money by selling weapons as well to Iran, as they executed funding both sides of the Iran war and the Iraq war that led to mass atrocities, the stealing of all the gold, and the escalation when Saddam Hussein felt he was betrayed by the CIA because they decided to fund the Iraqi war and weaponize through the fake narratives of weapons of mass destruction to persuade Americans to kill over 1.3 million Iraqi civilians in order to make sure that you could take over those vast resources. If you want, not even a conspiracy theory, but I think it's getting pretty clear, sex trafficking rings. You know that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, with her father, the Maxwell family, that was a Mossad agent, Jeffrey Epstein was installed in order to blackmail a network, and it was a Mossad operation in order to gain control for the mob, for the mafia, over different components of influence. And so they used it in order to blackmail politicians, like they used Bill Clinton in order to make sure that there was no two-state solution when he was negotiating the Oslo Accords in Norway, blackmail business leaders, blackmail royal family, and be able to blackmail them, have control, have tapes. And we know that those tapes, my speculation, allegedly are in Tel Aviv. And so they release some of the files, and those files make it very clear when you read between the lines and follow the money, that he was a Mossad blackmail, and that worked in collaboration with the CIA, because the CIA, after the assassination of JFK, was a hostile takeover of the economy to do the bidding of the Federal Reserve. Okay, what about weapons trafficking? Again, these are all declassified documents. Look up Operation Cyclone. This was between 1979 and 1989. This was CIA funded, and basically they were arming the the Mahadin. I still forget how to say that. The Mahadin militia, which is basically a group of fighters in Afghanistan. And this is the modus operandi with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the Israeli intelligence service, where you basically take a group and they are bidders to the highest bidder. You get them to do things like go and behead people and fight a war on your behalf, so you don't need congressional approval because it would be unpopular, because the Constitution said you need to do a overt war rather than a covert war. And the president then can sign up with plausible deniability to have a CIA-backed regime that then gets weapons into these groups so that you can then get them to fight your war against the Soviet Union, which was the controversy there. And that's how you know that this led to the creation of CIA agent Osama bin Laden and his group Al-Qaeda, which are open to the highest bidder, which right now are being used to be paid by Turkey, Qatar, US, Israel, in order to overthrow the Assad regime, so that they can occupy the oil, implement regime change, and usher in the proof of weapons network globalist agenda. And what they do is they pay them to do things like, when you kill someone, say Allahu Akbar, so therefore we can then say it is the Muslims. And then you can create narratives through the psyops that make it look like these people are trying to kill Jewish people. And then you can persuade all of the population of Jewish people to think they're in a fight for their life, so that they go to Israel, join the IDF, and then they engage in ethnic cleansing because they think they're in a fight for survival. And they get supported by the narrative of controlling the media changing things like the Schofield Bible in 1907, where the Zionists sponsored the spreading of a rewrite of the translation of the Bible to create evangelical Christians to reinterpret that a tribe is a country and you need to protect that country at all costs because the Messiah is going to return, and therefore you can get the proof of weapons network to back up and head over to this psyop of the mob that was created in order to create death and destruction and the profits of the military industrial complex. Please do not confuse this. This is a state. Israel is a state that was weaponized for this vision. And intelligence are a group of people. This is not anti-Semitism. This is not me saying because they create a psyop in order to fool the Jewish people. They create a psyop in order to confuse the Muslim people. They create a psyop in order to confuse the Christian people. And then they bribe through this bribery network to push up the narrative and create false flag operations, create fake terrorist attack even on their own people. Look at, if you want to know some of those, look at Operation Gladio. This was a CIA post-World War II operation that led up to the 1990s, where essentially you weaponize NATO, which we're told is a defense network, which is a sales machine for the mob and the military industrial complex to create covert regime changes by making you think that you're in a fight for your survival, you're in a fight against communism, you're a fight against the war on terror, and you can create these psyops. Basically, you can create a state, these false flag operations, and Operation Gladio. It was done across Europe in order to make you think that there was a Muslim invasion. It involved the CIA and open border policies and MI6, and these are declassified, so that they could support a right-wing narrative in order to achieve these different groups. It was done in Italy. It was done in Germany as well, to make you think that it was done in Belgium. It was done in Germany, so that they can weaken economies by having these groups that make you think that suddenly you're in a fight for survival. So they do bombings, they do assassinations, they do fake terror attacks, and then what do? They blame it on the left and the Democrats, and they blame it on the Labour Party so that they can manipulate public opinion and get an uprising from people. They can have open border policies, all funded, all covert operations. They did it through an Israeli agent called Tommy Robinson recently. You know, they have atrocities that happen. They film it. It's happening all across Germany right now to try and make you think that you need to go to war with Iran. Just look at the old habits. It is still happening right now. In fact, the biggest one was 9/11. If you're telling me that you believe that there was a CIA agent called Osama bin Laden, and he was just a normal person working without intelligence, without the mob, without the mafia, and he figured out how to penetrate the largest, most protected powers, protected by the largest intelligence agencies, and take down 2 towers by taking over a plane. And that was just done by a bunch of people in a cave because they wanted to take away your freedom. And then suddenly there's a controlled demolition in Tower 7 there was no plane that crashed. And suddenly the Pentagon had documents that were wiped out with $2 trillion of documentation that was covering up atrocities. And the people that penetrated, before that, Mossad was given access, and they arrested an urban movers van that had all of the bombs that were in there that created the controlled demolition. And they were held in custody by the FBI, but then the redacted files of 9/11 that we're about to get, that were released before, they contain those names. And then 9 months later, the Mossad operative said that they were there to document the falling of the towers because they knew about it before it actually happened. And Larry Silverstein, that bought it, a Zionist, 2 months before, and took out the very first insurance contract on terrorism and got $14 billion of payouts because it had asbestos, and therefore it was a bad investment, and the towers needed to be controlled, demolished. And so then you cooperated with groups that suddenly a Saudi Arabian passport appears in mint condition so you know who they are. And those very same people were the very same Wahhabi people that were weaponized by intelligence agencies because they're illiterate and they're told what their religion is rather than actually reading the Quran. And then all of the Muslims are like, that's not in the Quran. What are they doing? All these crazy things which are against the religion. And then they're told that what you need to do is you need to say Allahu Akbar, because then pretend that you're doing it in the name of the religion so that we can then use that narrative. And then we can execute our clean break memo that was written by President Netanyahu in his 1996 book, which told intelligence, and he came to Congress and said, you need to take out Sudan. You need to take out Libya. Libya wanted to create a Pan-African gold-backed currency. Sudan wanted to, you need to take out Iraq as well, because they were going to price gold. They were going to price their oil in gold in the euro, and they had vast gold reserves. And you need to take out Iraq. You need to take out Syria. You need to take out Lebanon. You need to take out Sudan. And finally, you need to take out Iran. It's still being executed right now. This is all happening in plain sight. And how do you get narrative control? Look up, again, not conspiracy theories. These are declassified documents. They rely upon you not knowing. Look up Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird was declassified, an operation that happened between the 1950s and the 1970s. It was a covert CIA program and mind control initiative in order to take over the media and influence perception to make you justify your war by making you scared of certain things. And this media was essentially, they took over networks and they installed CIA operatives in order to be the news anchors and the talking heads. What is less documented in all of these CIA operations, though, is what we got when you really understand the proof of weapons network and how it works, is the connection between Israeli Zionism, which is a group of atheists that were part of the mob, and its connection to the mafia and that relationship and how that was used in order to create the state of Israel, to have a jurisdiction where you could actually get away with the crimes against humanity and execute these covert operations that were eventually became so powerful that they were weaponized against the weakened, in debt slaved America to take over its Congress, take over its Senate. And so if you are familiar with any of the geopolitical sections I've covered, you will know that when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, it immediately led to World War I. And in 1917, you had a need to bring America into the war. So Walt Rothschild funded both sides. And Walt Rothschild was the one that received the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was a commitment by MI6 and the broke Winston Churchill and the UK government to bring America into the war under the control of the Federal Reserve in order to take over Palestine and use a narrative in order to export all of the Jewish people over there so that they would join the IDF and engage in terrorist activities like Haganah and various other things. This required control of media, control of narrative. This was the mob. This was the Jewish mob, which are the financiers, and then later had a partnership with the Italian mob after World War II that led to the creation of these things. It was the same Bank of England network that led to the transition to the Federal Reserve network. And out of that was the mob. And who were the mob? Well, Meyer Lansky, who was a Polish Jewish mobster, was essentially, and again, when I say Jewish mobster, I'm not talking about all the Jewish people and being anti-Semitic, as people will accuse. I'm talking about there was a Jewish mob, like there was an Italian mob. But what was the weapon that they created? Don't expose this. Don't talk about it. Operation Mockingbird was, we just need to say anyone that exposes it is anti-Semitic. And then we would mind control people into that in order to create this network. And basically you have useful idiots that don't know better, don't follow the money, all propping it up through the justification of their religion, the weaponization of their religion, which is why right now there's Jewish people protesting saying, I'm anti-Israel, not in my name, because they're following the money and they understand that I don't want to be connected to the Jewish mob and the Italian mob to create human trafficking rings and have a nation state that is committing a genocide right now and using Operation Mockingbird in order to make people think something's different and blackmailing people like Biden in order to say there were 40 beheaded babies, when anyone that's watched the documentary Atrocity Inc. on my blog would know that none of that was true. It was the same mob that created this atrocity propaganda in order to make you think. And then the UN publishes reports saying, no, there's no videos. It didn't happen. Everyone said it happened. But yeah, of course, there were deaths. There were the same groups that are funded in order to create these operations that led to the death. But then you can connect that to the Palestinian cause, justify a war, and do what you're doing right now. Weaponize the American side and the control over Congress through blackmail rings and lobby groups in order to justify and send money to the Italian mob and the Jewish mob by creating this network. And so if you don't know who Lansky is, Lansky basically ran the mafia. It was basically the mafia syndicate for about 40 years. It was done through a partnership between the Italian mob and the Jewish mob. And basically, he was the financier and the money launderer. And this led to the creation of lots of casinos and various other things in Las Vegas. It's all very well documented. This is the Jewish mob were basically financiers. And the Italian mob, through the partnership, the Jewish mob able to control various factions of the banks in order to do the money laundering. And then you need organizations that made up the construct of the proof of weapons network. The Italian mob were basically the muscles to execute it. And Israel was the jurisdiction that was needed, which was justified through the covert operations and the escalation and the history rewriting and narrative control that happened of World War I, which was a Bank of England consolidation of power to hand over power from UK, take over Palestine, hand it over to a Jewish mafia group through Walt Rothschild that brought in America to the war and create the nation state of Israel. And it was all done through terrorism, through settler colonialism, through ethnic cleansing, through forced flag operations and escalations, through narrative control, through war, and at its extreme, through genocide. And these are psyops to make you feel that if you're defending any of these things, you think you're going crazy. It was basically the way the Europeans founded the US and rewrote history. It's just the way it was done. They created Israel because they wanted to have a jurisdiction in order to transform the mob into a government. So then they could use all of the constructs of the post-World War II order, like the United Nations, like the International Monetary Fund, and they could prop up through, and they could get hold of this jurisdiction, and they could take any terrorism, because during this time, before 1948, Haganah, Likud, various other groups that will be covered that are part of the JFK assassination, they were able to reclassify terrorism as defense by having the United Nations rules and false flag operations. They were able to then use it by having jurisdiction that could launder money through these networks. And you could smuggle weapons in by controlling the networks through many of the declassified CIA operations, justify wars. And that's exactly how Israel was created. And so what happened in 1946? Remember, Israel was created in 1948. Zionism got its power in 1917 through MI6. Then there was a cooperation between the Jewish mafia and the Israeli mafia through the organization of Zionism and the justification of war through Rothschilds that were funding both sides of the war. In 1946, Bugsy Siegel, which was a member of the Jewish American mob, He opened up the Flamenco Hotel, which was a hotel in Las Vegas to launder money. And he was funded by Meyer Lansky and other mobsters. In 1946, who was going to be put and implanted as the original president or prime minister and the founder of Israel was David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion was a Zionist. He was involved heavily in the ideology, an atheist Zionist, weaponizing the Jewish faith in order to create these atrocities. And he was basically the primary national founder and the first prime minister of Israel. He was he was born in Poland. He was deeply influenced by his father's Zionist beliefs. And that basically led him to immigrate into Palestine in 1906 and join false flag operations and terrorist groups in order to get to the point where you could use the United Nations after World War II in order to create false flag operations that led to the creation of the nation state, so that you could combine the Jewish mob and the Italian mob and have jurisdiction and protection to institutionalize it around nation states. So in 1946, David Ben-Gurion, he was basically sent to sorry, I wrote down all the names because I don't want to forget them for those that want to fact check it and do more research. Basically an Israeli mobster called Reuven Daphne. And by the way, I got all of this from combining my following the money with the work of other people like Ryan Dawson, who's done immense amounts of work and research. Credit to them. And Corey Hughes was somebody that I met when I met a Bitcoiner called, when you're a Bitcoiner, you meet all the interesting people, who I met through Tone Vase as well. And he spent like the last 7 or 8 years doing all this stuff. So I want to give credit to them. I've been studying it, but based upon their work as well, and then combining it with my follow the money stuff. Basically, he was a member of a pre-Israeli terrorist group called Haganah. And Haganah met with Bugsy Siegel. The member of Haganah, he met with Bugsy Siegel. And his job was to raise funds and to procure weapons in order to start ethnically cleansing the Palestinians so that it can be used in order to rewrite history and create mind control, narrative control around this being something that it wasn't. This was essentially the birth of the relationship between the Israelis, the US mafia, and it was headed up by the Jewish mob in order to create the finance, and the Italian mob in order to get the muscle. And there was a weapons manufacturing industry, drug trafficking, all of the institutionalization of these different crimes. David Ben-Gurion basically partnered with Rudolf Sanborn, and they basically would break into, basically after the World War II, they would break into the armories of post-World War II storage units. They would steal the weapons, and then they would send them to Israel in order to militarize the terrorist groups like Haganah and Irgun. And it was done via a company in Virginia called International Armament Corporation, commonly known as Interarms. I got to check the notes on this stuff, so I want to make sure I've got it so that anyone can go back and fact check it. Or it was called Interarm Co. as well. And this was a partnership with the mob in order to take those weapons, send them over to Israel in order to fund terrorism. And this was the creation of, the kind of the false flag operation and many of these ops that MI6, CIA, and Mossad did. The company was run by a CIA agent. His name was Samuel Cunnings. You can look up the history of Samuel Cunnings. And on the July the 1st, 1945, David Ben-Gurion basically had a meeting with Sonneborn, and it was in his apartment in New York. And this was leading to the formation of a secretive organization, you can look it up, known as the Sonneborn Institute. This group was basically was instrumental in producing and supplying arms to the Haganah group, which was a terrorist militia. Now you get to understand why these groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, it is a model that was formed during this time through some of the operations that I covered. And many of them were able to send these weapons that were going into, basically, they wanted to make you think that these weapons were going into the anti-Castro Cuban fight against communism. And so they create the control, used through control of media, they make you think, oh, we're fighting the communists. Remember, the communists were created through the Bolshevik Revolution, which was the Jewish mob as well, that used Marxist communism to overthrow the Tsar in Russia and replace it with the Soviet Union. The same money flows that created the Federal Reserve to have crony capitalism. And then you can have the Cold War and these endless wars fund both sides. And instead, they were essentially going to Israel in this time. And so hence, when you see the JFK file drops, loads of them were around Cuban red herrings. And so while that was fascinating, the Castro stuff, you know that is connected to the mob, but then it is all censored around the connection to Zionism and the Israeli intelligence service. Why? Because they still exist today. They are still being used with the same strategy today. And when you understand the pattern, you recognize that we are just in charge by the mob. They control our countries. And the mafia participated in an operation that JFK wanted to stop. And that was that they were stealing nuclear material from the US through Apollo, Pennsylvania, through a company called NUMEC, the NUMEC plant. And this was declassified in some of the documents it came through. So we knew this already, but now we got more and more documents around it. It happened in the 1960s, and there was an investigation that essentially revealed that there were massive discrepancies in the 400 pounds of enriched uranium that is required to have a military program inventory, and it was missing, and it was highly enriched uranium. It's called HEU, which is a very important resource if you want a nuclear program. And that was the actual weapons of mass destruction. And where was it going? It was going to Israel. And Israel, through covert operations, through Netanyahu and a terrorist party called Likud, I'll go through that as well, was the one that came to Congress on behalf of the Jewish mob and the Italian mob to say Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Iran has weapons of mass destruction, but please go after Iraq first. And it was a complete covert operation to use military, the US military, to kill and massacre 1.3 million civilians, which was revealed through Bitcoin allowing to fund a website called WikiLeaks when Julian Assange was able to fight the financial blockade and upload all of the documents from whistleblowers that were showing the footage and the crimes against humanity that were being committed, which was in fact all an order from the Jewish mob and the Italian mob via the Israeli government and Mossad. And so what did JFK do? He started making accusations that this enriched material was diverted to an illegal nuclear financial weapon of mass destruction in Israel. And JFK wanted to put an end to it. And the US mafia oversaw the supply, basically the shipping, because remember, through Operation Paperclip, you had the mafia collaborating with the government, which led to the creation of the CIA. And so the ports were controlled by the mobsters, and they were allowing those weapons and the enriched uranium to get to Israel because there was a partnership between the financiers, the Israeli mob, and the Jewish mob, and the Italian mob. And so the CIA basically was taking orders from Tel Aviv. And this is how it's always been. And this is how it is today. And this is exactly how the system still works. And so a gentleman called Mickey Cohen, he was the guy that created many of the gambling, money laundering industry, the extortion networks, and the racketeering, and basically the deep connections to both the Chicago mafia and the Jewish American mobsters. He was in prison at the time of JFK's assassination. And you've got to connect a few dots because the Israeli intelligence service wanted to take away the names, but you can do a little bit of reverse engineering and see what the censorship tells you, because there was a guy called Alexander Gruber, and Alexander Gruber was the right-hand man of Mark Rubenstein, otherwise known as Mark Ruby. And Mark Rubenstein was taking orders from the Making Begum, and you can look all this stuff up. He was the creator of a party in Israel called Ergun. And that Ergun party is the same party that Benjamin Netanyahu represents today. It was a terrorist group called Ergun that was then changed into a political group called the Likud that basically carried out false flag terrorist attacks against even British forces in occupied Palestine when the Brits were occupying it. And they blew up and escalated different things like King David Hotel in order to try and they were dressing up as Arabs to blame them so that you could have a retaliation and a war that was backed by MI6, Rothschilds, the Italian mafia, the Jewish mafia, that led to the 1948 war. And what was the result of the 1948 war? You had the UN, which was a post-World War II construct, to recognize the state of Israel. And now you could repackage terrorism into the IDF. You could repackage the Haganah groups and the various other things. And you could have a state in order to get protection and use these different operations, just like the operations like the King David Hotel bombing. Look it up in 1946, which essentially killed 91 people, British people, Jewish people, Arab people. It was a false flag operation. They dressed up as Arabs in order to blame the Arabs to escalate it to the war. Also, the Delf Yassin massacres in 1948 that led to the escalation and the retaliation. And then we're told that these people are trying to kill the Jews. This was the foundation of false flag operations and terrorism. Gruber, he met with Jack Ruby, otherwise known AKA as Jack Rubenstein. He met 3 weeks before the assassination of JFK. And Jack Ruby was the person that was a nightclub owner who shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald and later was taken out. This is the guy that the accused of basically assassination of JFK was Lee Harvey Oswald. And what you can tell by looking at through this, that Lee Harvey Oswald was actually multiple impersonators. He was framed. He was a CIA agent as well. On November the 24th, 1963, he was the one with two shooters now that they now have revealed was framed for the assassination of JFK. The first call that Jack Ruby made 3 days, immediately after, if you go through documents, was to Oswald. And so there's a direct connection there. And the direct connection was the arrest of Al Gruber. Oswald was a CIA fall guy. This was a very carefully controlled manipulation and narrative in order to wipe out JFK, because he was standing up against the illegal nuclear program and a couple of other things as well. There were multiple impersonators of Oswald. They wanted to make it look like, oh, this one came back from the Soviet Union, so you can do the Russia thing. And then this one was hanging around, the anti-Castro side as well. But essentially, Al Gruber gave Jack Ruby the order to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. That was, and that was led to the death of Lee Harvey Oswald because he was a CIA agent and they turned on him. David Ben-Gurion was essentially the man at the top of the whole chain, and he was the founder and the lead assassin that led to the creation of Israel. So Ben-Gurion was basically executing the orders through Menachem Begin, which was later became a prime minister of Israel. And that was done through Yitzhak Shamir and Rubin. And they were they're essentially the functioning heads of Israel at the time of the assassination of JFK, which was an intelligence operation by Mossad, and countless books have been written of all the major assassinations being done by the Jewish mob, the Italian mob, using Israel as the jurisdiction. And the cover-up of that was done by the Israeli intelligence service, otherwise known as ISIS. The same ones that funds the regimes that they weaponize through the wars that they create in order to create the fake war between the Jews and the Muslims today, and the radical groups that they basically rent out in order to create crimes against humanity. This is why it's so lawless. This is why ever since October the 7th, it has been such a crazy operation, because this was the CIA relationship that led to basically the control of the secret services. And that was the involvement of the ability to assassinate the president through two shooters. Now, what do the document drops focus on? They focus on Oswald, of course, returning from the Soviet Union. And if you went to the spaces, they were all focused on how this is Russia. Why would it be hidden if it was Russia? And they focused on his trip to Mexico City. These were red herrings in order to distract you from where your eyes really should be, because it was JFK. What was he doing? He firstly wanted to expose the nuclear program, and he was enraged by it. But also, he was trying to shut down the precursor to an organization that has paid every single, virtually all of them, apart from Thomas Massie, Congress member and Senate member in American politics today, an organization called AIPAC. And it was called something slightly different at the time. He said, you must register as a foreign agent, because he wanted to stop the blackmail rings and the political financing that was turning America into America first, into Israel first. And that was for the Jewish mob and the Italian mob through the jurisdiction of Israel. And that created the bribery rings that are also going to be released files for. He wanted to put an end to the Israeli illegal weapons of mass destruction nuclear program that Netanyahu, through the party that he comes from, came to Congress and said, it's Iran and Iraq, therefore you need to go to there. And therefore he needed another false flag operation to justify it to the American people, which is why after the assassination of JFK, what else did he do? Before that, he was launching a silver-backed currency that through an executive order. But who was put in power after the assassination of JFK? Lyndon B. Johnson. LBJ was in on the whole thing, and he was basically reversing American first policies into Israel first policies to construct the takeover of the US government, the US Congress, and the US Senate by Mossad, and the takeover of CIA into this one network, and increase the power of the Jewish mob in order to make sure that Israel had more policies. He was a prostitute for Israel, and he had deep ties. LBJ had deep ties, and all the clues were there. Now, when the files dropped this week, immediately, as I said, there was a redact request, which is why there was a delay from the Israeli intelligence service, ISIS. And there were a few omissions that were sprinkled in, and you can create conspiracy theory about why they were there. I gave a few based upon my macro understanding that I discussed in part 2. But there were a few omissions that were in the doc, and I'll read the ones that were there, the ones that slipped through. Quote, Israel is no good. Israel was behind the JFK assassination. Another quote, we now have plenty of money. Our new backers are Jews. That's their quote, not mine, basically the Jewish mob. As soon as we can take out Kennedy. These quotes are in the declassified documents. These were the documents that were hidden, and these were the documents that to this day were requested by the Israeli intelligence service, ISIS, to be not come out, which is why there was delays and why there was a scramble. As I said, the connection and the dots that I did, I want to give credit to Corey Hughes, who's written books on this, Ryan Dawson, that's created many different documentaries, and they have different theories of how this happened. This is what I believe to be the most credible story, based upon, they both come up with that there were two shooters. They end up in the same results, but they have different narratives of how we actually got here. And it's a massive rabbit hole if you want to go down it. But to me, I just gave you enough details from following the money to help you understand that Israel, through the conduit of repackaging terrorism into statehood, not the Israeli people, not the Jewish people, but the Israeli government, through Mossad, killed JFK to control US intelligence, to control US Congress, to control US Senate through LBJ, because immediately AIPAC was allowed to bribe politicians and not register as a foreign agent like China and Russia and any other foreign interest. And then they were able to expand globally through blackmail rings that now they had statehood, now they had illegal nukes and weapons of mass destruction. They were able to engage in psyops, just as I said, to blackmail all politicians. And so the Israeli government is the mob. That's why we're seeing the brutality. That's why we're seeing the weaponization of information. That's why we're seeing atheist people weaponize the major religions in order to justify crimes against humanity. That's why the judge exposed that there was assassination attempts when the ICJ court put an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. That's why South Africa are being weaponized by Trump and Musk right now, because the ICC, the South African case, was the one that proved plausible genocide. That's why the UN is being defunded by Trump and the Trump administration right now, because it was saying that there was none of the things that everyone was saying on October the 7th happened. And there were, in fact, the Israeli government and the IDF have been weaponizing sexual assault and sexual violence. And the UN just repeated that. I covered that last week. Immediately after, Israel killed RFK because he wanted to open up an investigation. He knew what happened. He will expose the truth. And so they needed to get rid of him. And we'll probably get the RFK files soon, and I'll do a similar analysis. And when you see the MLK, the Martin Luther King files, you will see a similar analysis. See the book that MLK wrote, and why he needed to be wiped out. We'll do another one in a different episode. Israel attacked the USS Liberty to expand their territory from the 1948 borders to the 1967 borders, that where they essentially required killing Americans in the USS Liberty ship, where LBJ said after the assassination of Kennedy, you need to be in this location. He gave that location to Mossad. They killed Americans in USS Liberty, and they said it was the Egyptians to try and get America to go to a nuclear war with Egypt so that it could expand their borders to the 1967 borders. This was all about war border expansion through ethnic cleansing, false flag operations, and everything we know that intelligence services do. This was all about getting the US into war with Egypt. Israel is also behind the Epstein blackmail. This is where he Epstein bribed politicians like Bill Clinton in order to ensure that when there was peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine, and there was an installed puppet government by the US, and then the Netanyahu wanted to say, no, we need a more extreme government. So through Qatar funded Hamas in order to have an uprising so you could push that to war. When Bill Clinton wanted to negotiate peace, they blackmailed him. They got full control. They Epstein filed him, and they made sure a two-state solution never happened. And then they rewrite history to make it look like it was just the corrupt Arabs that were taking away every deal, and we were trying to get peace every time. And then they weaponize that narrative control out to the network of people that think for the right reasons that they're protecting their people. You know, this is the weaponization of the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith, and the Christian faith. Israel did 9/11 with the CIA and Saudi Arabia and Al Qaeda, which was a CIA-backed group, just through the operations that we covered earlier. And they were weaponized in order to create that false flag, which led to the 3,000 deaths of American people and the millions of deaths of all the wars that were created. And they didn't go into Saudi Arabia, where they said the terrorists came from. They went to Iraq because they get a false narrative of Israel had the financial weapons of mass destruction. They said Iraq had it. And then they create the Cream-Blake memo that led to all the wars that bankrupted America. And now you are $36 trillion of debt in forever war after forever war, to the point where when the US dollar is no longer useful, when the host state is no longer useful, they can just change the world order through the proof of weapons network, as I covered in the macro section in part 2. Israel also made sure that there were funding that got through to Hamas via Qatar that allowed to create the October the 7th, which was an operation that did lead to killing, but also it was allowed to happen because it led to the Hannibal Directive. The Hannibal Directive, where the chief of war of Israel that initiated the directive, that retired from the government, went on Israeli TV and said, I initiated the Hannibal Directive, which is where we kill our own people in order to ensure that hostages, but we can then say that the atrocity happened. Watch the documentary Atrocity Inc. I published it on my blog. And then you say all these atrocities happened, which is control of the narrative. And then what do you get? You get to expand the 48 borders to the 67 borders, to the complete annihilation, ethnic cleansing, genocide of the Palestinians, wipe out the whole thing. And now you've got the Greater Israel Project, and you can take useful idiots, paid idiots like Biden, to say there were 40 beheaded babies when none of that happened, because that came from Netanyahu. Netanyahu got it from an IDF soldier. The IDF soldier got it from a payment through a media-controlled narrative to say that it happened. And then the Hannibal Directive would kill the people and say these were mass sexual atrocities. I can't say it without getting taken out. It is an evil mobster network. That is exactly what it is. And that is exactly what when you follow the money, you can put together the connections. And every file that has been released, I'm pretty sure, just like the JFK files confirmed, you're going to see a similar thing. And we need to wake up, people. Just so you know, if you want some names as well from the research, Kerry Thornley. Kerry Thornley was a fake Oswald as well. Kerry was the person that shot the Tibbets, basically the police officer that was assassinated on the 22nd of November, 1963, the same day as JFK was assassinated, to hide the operation. The real Oswald, he was not a communist. He was a CIA agent. He loved JFK, and he was framed. We get the additional files as well. Basically, JFK was assassinated through a combination of the CIA in order to have access to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the CIA was taken over by the Mossad, the mafia, and the Israeli Jewish mafia, and that relationship was weaponized in order to kill JFK, so that the weapons of mass destruction could not be interfered, and Israel could get it. And they could run their blackmail rings in order to take over Congress and use LBJ as a mechanism for turning America first into so basically the LA mob was being run by Begin, Mishin Begin. He became the 6th prime minister of Israel, and he was serving after the LBJ. LBJ significantly increased the Jewish mob, the Israeli mob power between 1977 and 1983. He was the leader of the right-wing Likud party. The right-wing Likud party is the current party and coalition in charge of the Israeli government right now, which is led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who the ICC has ruled as a war crime that was up for corruption, that has basically been done for blackmail, crimes against humanity, and is being repackaged by the Trump administration and the Biden administration as America's best friend. The directive of the Likud, just so you know, remember they said the Hamas charter was trying to kill all Jews from the river to the sea? That's actually a quote from the Likud directive. The Likud is Benjamin Netanyahu's party that was created by Begin. And they basically said that they will control Palestine from the river to the sea. And then they repackaged it and said that's what they said. And that's part of that. And that is what they are doing right now. And that's what October the 7th was. That was what the false flag in 67 was. That is what the false flags in 48 was. And this is exactly what it is today. He was the leader of the Irgun party. The Irgun was the terrorist group from 1943 to 1948 that led to the creation of Israel, that later became the IDF when they repackaged that group. And then they were able to call terrorism defense. And then they were able to weaponize false flags and war in order to make people believe they're always defending. And these were the groups that were deeply connected to the funding of both sides of World War I and World War II, and the covering up of history in order to make the world think a different version of events is happening. Essentially, Begin is the father of global terrorism. That's exactly how it happened. The false flags, the weapons of mass destruction, the radicalization of groups, the partnership with Saudi Arabia through the Wahhabi ideology, the weaponization of telling people whenever you pay them, say this, Allahu Akbar, before, create crimes against humanity, make people hate Muslims, do 9/11, the whole operation. You can track it through. It's obvious now, because between 1946 and 1963, the Italian mafia and the Israeli mob were one in the same thing. And that was the relationship died off around about the 1970s when Meyer Lansky was on the run. And where did he go on the run? He used his right of return in order to use Israel as a jurisdiction to protect his crimes. But eventually he ended up in prison. And the mob then basically set up these drug trafficking rings and these routes between Venezuela and Saigon in Vietnam that were basically funded by the state of Israel. If it was not for the mob, basically, there would be no Israel today. That's the reality. LBJ was an Israeli puppet that gave Israel, the US, exactly what it needed to turn over the Mossad over to CIA. to turn America first into Israel first. And today, the Trump administration signed off on basically carrying on the Biden genocide. He said, we're going to pretend we're getting peace. So he said, I want ceasefire. So when I control in day one, we get ceasefire. He allowed for phase one to happen. Phase one is the returning of some of the hostages. The returning of the hostages went through as planned. There was countless violation from the Israeli mob and the government in order to try and derail that process. And then it goes into phase two. Phase two is where the IDF need to unprotect the border between Egypt and Rafah in Gaza. They refused to do that. And what did they do? They took what happened. So remember, through Hannibal Directive, when Israel was killing some of the hostages, there was a video from the family of the Bibas family. And the father came out and said, Israel has killed my 2 children and they killed my wife. And that video came out in November 2023. You can find the video. They didn't let that get any attention. And then they saved that PR strategy until the Trump administration came through. Then you got to ask what happened in Trump. We've been covering it in Bitcoin Hard Talk. How was he allowed to get away with all the crimes that they were coming after him for? Suddenly they disappear and now he's allowed to play president. Suddenly the whole technocrat network realign around Trump. Suddenly all of this happens. He gets money from Adelson and $250 million from the network and AIPAC in order to fulfill what he's meant to be done to fulfill. And now, after ceasefire phase one happens, Egypt and the GCC come out with a plan, $53 billion of investment. The United Nations, only Israel and America use their veto vote to ensure the peace doesn't happen. Netanyahu runs around like crazy. His government is about to fall because it's a coalition government. And the people that left the government said, if you don't go back to war, then I'll dismantle your party. And if it dismantles the party and if Netanyahu loses, then he has to face his corruption claims. He has to face what the Israeli protesters all know, that the Israeli government is not returning the hostage on purpose to go to war, and they are weaponizing their own people. And so they saved phase two to say that Hamas strangled the babies of the Bibas. The Bibas, the other members of family came out saying, stop weaponizing, stop lying about what happened to our family. This is traumatic for us. And we know who did it. They were blaming the Israeli government. And the protesters in Israel, they're all uprising against their government because they've been psyoped into thinking that all these people, the Palestinians, are after their lives. And they're more radicalized, but they're saying, we know the Israeli government doesn't want to release the hostages because they want to take over all the land. And so then they're protesting, saying, give back our hostages. And they may go into civil war right now because instead of ending the damn thing, Trump signed off and green-lighted and lied to all the American people about what happened with the hostages and created the justification and the narrative control that is required in order to slowly build up a narrative that America needs to go to war with Iran in a desperate attempt because Israel is holding on and Netanyahu is holding on to an old model. When I believe the Proof of Weapons Network has said, we're going to stabilize the Middle East and Israel get in check. And Israel is fighting back and using his mechanism of the Trump administration in order to try and push a narrative of war. And maybe that is the plan in order to have that final escalation and the closest to World War III you could get in order to push back and get to negotiation. Who knows? But I covered my analysis in the macro section by following the money of why I think they're not going to get a long-term war with Iran, despite what Netanyahu wants. So the reality is, I'm sorry, that Trump got approval for $6 billion in the 1.6 trillion that he got approval of to prevent the government shutdown. And so far in his administration, he sent over $12 trillion to Israel, and he allowed them to use the ceasefire to re-weaponize, and now has approved and green-lighted an invasion and doing exactly what Biden did. Genocide Joe, Holocaust Harris has now been green-lighted by the so-called peace man as escalation is happening on every front and crimes against humanity are happening right now as we speak. There was a starvation campaign signed off by the Trump administration. No water, no electricity, no food, no shelter, no aid, no water, no fuel. And right now, today, the Israeli mob terrorists have essentially blown up the only cancer hospital to ensure that those that need cancer protection can't get it unless they go to Jordan or Egypt, which is what Trump managed to get the king of Jordan in the humiliation ritual, which is what they'd already agreed anyway. Today, they are blowing up all of the infrastructure that's required for the survival of the civilians. And we've gone from 2.3 million Palestinians in West Bank to Trump's number of 1.7 million, with people searching for their family in the rubble as a new ground invasion happens. And we are watching the whole thing happen right in front of our eyes. And people are being told that in the name of MAGA, this is a good thing because Israel is our best friend, because your Senate and Congress have been bribed and your media has been blackmailed. And the whole thing that led to the assassination of your president is still the force that is in charge today. Then we need to ask the question. There won't be a ceasefire because of that. Because AIPAC has bought all of it. There are blackmail rings like Epstein. Let's get these files out. Let's tell the truth. Let's commit to that there was a US Jewish mob that weaponized the religions in order to create this. And we are transitioned to a technocratic state where the leaders, the billionaires that have to bow down to the proof of weapon network, have to change their narrative. Elon Musk was the climate change left-wing guy that said good things about, how to prevent radicalization, and now had to do the Auschwitz tour and go on camera and have an Israel first policy and exert all the regime change that's needed to justify and push agents like Tommy Robinson to make hate against the Muslim people, to make it where the Jewish people and the Muslim people and the Christians are all in a fight with each other, divide and conquer. And who's beta testing all of the technology, all of the AI technology? Peter Thiel was given the technology. He's the CEO of Palantir. And Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, with the PayPal mafia, they are exerting a mission of the proof of weapons network. And you're believing that they are America first when they are just exerting the power structures that I covered in part 2 in the proof of weapon network. It's not America first. It's Israel first if you go to war. This is basically the struggle between the free world and the mob. And people are defending the mob. And I went on Spaces and people don't want to talk about the Israel connection at all because they are scared of being told that they are anti-Semitic or getting censored or losing their job or having their bank account shut down or having any of these power structures that happen when you reveal the truth. But the people do have the ultimate power. The people are able to expose this. They can only go where the people let it go. The resistance is the proof of weapons network. To the proof of weapons network is the decentralized proof of work. It is an FU to the system. It is unweaponizing the top of the chain, the central banking cartel, the cabal of the proof of weapons network that follows global capital. And it is blowing up on the people because it's being used and weaponized against it. And you're being told that you need to defend them. This is the very definition of a psyop. Let's bring it slightly to today anyway. I've only got 10 minutes on X and we'll cut out. I know I covered a lot today, but I just really want to get through this as well. So today, let's call it the mob now. The mob that control the proof of weapons network are at disposed. The Israel first policy is basically they've got Congress and they've got Senate and they've got people thinking they don't want to talk about it because they're fearful of being called anti-Semitic. Israel started a ground invasion in Gaza. That didn't need to happen. There was a plan. The whole GCC was behind that plan. He's escalating that. That's leading to deaths, over 1,000 deaths since that. Civilian, women, children, blowing up of infrastructure, ethnic cleansing, genocide, the killing, watching it on video, being shared through Telegram, freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. Trump had a call with Putin. And essentially, we know that they're negotiating the power structures because he's just one part of it. He's just one part of it. There was a filed accusation against Netanyahu stating that he ignored all of the intelligence and all of the warnings pre-October the 7th. They came from multiple places. So this is a new report that came out, and charges against Netanyahu for his crimes against humanity. It wasn't just Netanyahu that knew. Every regional state and actor over the region, they knew about October the 7th before October the 7th. So did some of the major BRICS partners as well, and the players. So did the US. The US intelligence at the higher level. October the 7th was essentially the final war to take it from the no borders to the 48 borders to the 67 borders to the 2025 borders, and determine the winner. And whoever comes out essentially on top will set the new world order. We could either go down two routes. We can go through the old death and destruction, or we can go through a regional power. And if you go to World War III, quite clearly, China will just remain neutral like America did in World War I, II, and sit back and just build itself. And everyone will lose. It will be an economic disaster for everybody. That's based upon the Israeli first policy to try and get to war with Iran. And Trump is delivering all of the narrative in order to rile up the MAGA people to get excited about another forever war in the Middle East, to serve the agenda of the one that does have the illegal weapons of mass destruction and is controlled by the mob and is causing all the problems in the region. All of the players in the proof of weapons network have taken their bets already. And remember, they use their power in order to direct it. So even if Netanyahu or Trump doesn't want to pay ball, they decide through the flows of capital that I covered in the macro section in part 2. They hedge their positions as well in case it goes wrong. So follow the money and you can find out. This is what draws me to my conclusion that although Israel looks like it has the power, the JFK assassination was an essential part of revealing and confirming what we all knew already. And you need to get with the program, and we need to call it out because the people do have the power in the end. I believe that Israel has lost. Here's what I think you need to know about the Middle East today in order to understand the game, and this is where I get from following the money. Iran has switched to is basically its old agenda of funding militia groups and creating the sectarian divides in order to justify certain parts of the wars. And I believe it's now cooperating with the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Cooperation, whatever that stands for. They've got the sovereign wealth and they've got the power. Don't give credit to Israel, for decapitating basically the strikes that they did with Hezbollah and Hamas, because I've done the analysis and I believe that they were able to get those leaders because maybe, just maybe, Iran may have had and assisted in allowing that to happen. I know that's controversial, but maybe the new world order was set. Remember, the helicopter came down. There was a regime change. And then immediately after that, the leaders were allowed to be assassinated. Maybe this is the regime change. Maybe it's already happened. There was a cooperation agreement. So why are we having this ratcheting up of narrative? This was essentially the beginning of the end of Axis. And I think we moved to a more new normalization without death and violence because we don't need it. The Axis was not just a resistance. It was essentially the reason that Zionism existed. Zionism existed based upon being able to put out the narrative that the life of the Jews is always being attacked by the Muslims that want to kill them and the Islamists, the term that the Likud party created in order to make you think that. When those Islamists were actually doing the bidding to the highest bidder in order to justify wars when they wanted to justify them. So it was a justification for Zionism, because then you can push out anti-Semitism and you can drive people to extreme psyops. But people just don't understand it because it's too damn complex. It's like a paradox. But the truth is when you follow the money, and so hopefully more people will watch this stuff and understand. Assad was, I don't think he was actually overthrown. I think he stepped down. I think the regional powers in the region decided that that is the proof of weapons network, and that is the consensus of the new power that decide that. The new Syria is basically currently being run by probably the GCC in Turkey. That HTS, the so-called Syrian National Army that signed this agreement right now, I think they're basically, they were funding the other terrorist groups. And they're just mercenaries. What are mercenaries? Mercenaries are open to the highest bidder. It's just literally terrorism as a service, and they go on camera to whoever's willing to pay them. Turkey and the GCC paid them. Assad decided that he would step down. I think the powers in the region, whether it's Russia and Iran, they decided that there is a regime change. The Axis maybe are no longer serving that purpose, and we can move towards a peace in the region. When I follow the money, remember HTS, aka ISIS, aka Al Qaeda, aka they're just open to the highest bidder. When the French want to use them, they use them for exploiting resources in Africa. When Israel wants to use them, they use them so they can connect ISIS to resistance and justify war. When America wants to use them, they use them when they need resources. When they need to get the Americans to believe that we're at threat of their life, because what came after 9/11? The Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is a surveillance state, Guantanamo Bay. Exactly what led to the anti-terrorism acts in UK, the surveillance state. The same thing that is allowing people to be arrested today for speaking out and take away freedom of speech. The same thing that Trump is doing today when he is arresting any protest against Palestinians. And the networks like the World Economic Forum, George Soros, if they want to make it look like a pro-Palestinian is a pro-Hamas, then they just burn the American flag and put that on camera and put it out through their networks, because the mob is control of the media. The money is being taken from you through USAID. USAID is funding all these groups. That was exposed. We've got the numbers now. Remember, today's terrorists are tomorrow's heroes and freedom fighters. That's the way it works. They literally put an ISIS head chopper, put a suit on him, and now said, while they're creating fake videos of him going Allahu Akbar and beheading people, they then took the same person and put a suit on him, a nice watch, and say, you are now playing president of Syria. And you're getting the backing of the different groups that are setting through the proof of weapons network what the new world order looks like. They don't have an ideology. They're not religious. They are weaponizing religion. Money is their god. And you can infiltrate the top and then have a group underneath you that are told what they need to do. Then they're not literate. They don't know what it is. They don't know what they think that they're doing the religion that they're told that they're doing. This is a psyop of the mob of the highest level. They pretend to be, Muslims or Jewish. You can change that as ever you want. You can take the people that think they're doing, it's like the people in America. What did you need to do in order to radicalize America to kill 1.3 million Iraqi civilians? You needed 9/11. And then they thought they were fighting for their country, for their freedom, for their values. They got radicalized through this psyop. And then they went and they killed, civilians. And then the veterans came back and the government didn't look after them. They ended up homeless, addicted to drugs, PTSD, traumatized from the acts that they needed to do. This is a mafia organization. It's always been in control. It's the proof of weapons network. This is fiat currency. This is what central banks were created for. This is the geopolitics. It's not static. It moves. It is the flows of capital, and it is mob run, and it is crimes against humanity. And we get to expose it right now because we created a decentralized network of money that took on the central banks and everything that I covered in this week in Bitcoin section. HTS, if they want, they can work for the CIA if they want to pay more. Tomorrow they can work for the opposing side. Then they can work for Turkey. Then they can work for Israel. They can let Israel expand and take over the land. They go wherever the money takes them because they are for rent. Netanyahu was essentially in a race against, he had time by the order to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. The resistance against it, because we protested, because the people uprose, because we exposed the information on X, because we got the information through Telegram, through encrypted technology, because the Palestinians were able to show us what was happening to them. For 16 months, we've been saying this is crimes against humanity happening right in front of our eyes. The media is lying to us. Everything is lying to us. You are being psyoped. These people that are debating with you are actually agents that are paid by influencers. They're being paid. They're being paid in order to say, don't let them speak about this, speak about that, rewrite history. This is how they rewrite history. But they lost. The narrative is not winning. The files are being released. The control vectors do not exist anymore. The people do have the power to fight against the proof of weapons network. Bitcoin allows you to protest against and opt out of the central banking proof of weapons network run by the mob and controlled. We get to do this, and you've got to get out of the psyop. Even Trump told you fake news. We released US aid. All of it is in front of you. Now, I know most people are so in debt slaved, trying to figure out how to pay their bills that they can't boycott debt. They can't save in Bitcoin. They can't do that. And unfortunately, you need to figure out a way, because this is the agenda. This is following the money. This is the importance of understanding this. If you are fighting for this, you are fighting for the mob to steal your money, and you're paying the bill. Your taxpayer money is being used. Your inflation is making you homeless. You are taking the crimes against humanity and justifying them. This is what the system has come to. And they say it's a Jewish state. Why do they say it's a Jewish state? So they can weaponize anti-Semitism in order to justify whatever they want to do. Israel wants to create a second US hegemony under the old model of death and destruction, destabilize the Middle East, because they have the weapons of mass destruction and the illegal nukes that JFK lost his life for in order to give you. They want to be the hegemony. They want to control the cybersecurity. They want to control the AI-powered proof of weapons network. And that is at the destruction of America first, because they don't care. But the power and the money is in the GCC that got up their surpluses. This is the same place that Britain was during World War I when the Bank of England took it over. And now the Fed got you here. During this last 16 months, Netanyahu has essentially been in a race against time. He had 16 months to achieve the mission of achieving the ethnic cleansing, and he got exposed. And because we pushed the narrative, we stood up to the lies, he has lost. Israel has a tainted reputation. Biden lost the politics. Genocide Joe, Holocaust Horace. We voted for Trump because of the atrocities and crimes against humanity that they were covering up. Trump is now in power. We now need to make sure that he is not allowed to get away with this because Israel is trying to manipulate him because they paid for him. Now, are these files being released against that? This is the situation. It's a fluid situation. But the GCC has already successfully decided what the new vision is, what the regional plan is. And they have the power. They're investing in artificial intelligence in China and America. They are dictating the flow of capitals. And I believe the Proof of Weapons Network has said World War III is not viable. And the only one that will take us to World War III is Netanyahu in order to protect his career, in order to create crimes against humanity, in order to break ceasefire deals, in order to this whole deal that they'll get in the end could have been broken 8 months ago. I watched the whole damn thing. I watched the manipulation of media. I watched the mob do this. It is a psyop. He wanted to totally displace the Palestinians. He had Biden, Genocide Joe. He had Holocaust Harris. And now he had Trump. Who has tried to assassinate Trump? What was that all about? We're going to find out eventually. But who was next in charge? J.D. Vance. Who's J.D. Vance? He was funded by Peter Thiel. Who's Peter Thiel? Palantir. Who's Palantir? The AI military-industrial complex. What is the AI military-industrial complex doing? They are funding a genocide, occupation as a service, genocide as a service in Gaza right now. It is killing people. It is killing women. It is killing babies. And they are trying to justify this whole damn thing. And all we need to do is expose the truth for what it does and stand up for humanity because we are winning. Because if they win the narrative, they will get away with it. And you MAGA, you Trump people, take your leader and don't let him do it. Don't let him justify it because it will take down America. It will asset strip America for those that benefit from war, for the mob. Sex trafficking, human trafficking, crimes against humanity. That is what's behind this. Don't let him do it. The regional plan is fast approaching. Follow the money. America needs to focus on America first. You are no longer the global hegemon. You are a regional power, and that's where the cookie crumbles right now. Just like Britain need to accept it. Europe, if you don't normalize with Russia, then you're going to be sacrificed by the ECB. Middle East has the cards right now. BRICS is aligned with the Middle East, and we can usher in a fourth turning, an environment of prosperity. And the GCC can say, Saudi can say, there will be a two-state solution because we're going to prevent an uprising. All of the noise is on Egypt right now. Egypt is on the verge of an uprising, and Netanyahu wants that uprising to happen. America wants to stabilize Syria. Israel wants the Greater Israel Project. They want to push. Forever war, forever war, forever war. No more death, no more destruction. This is a war criminal that is propping up the... This is crimes against humanity. This person needs to be taken out. This government needs to be replaced and de-radicalized because we need peace. And that is what the money is saying right now. That is what the money is saying. So eventually, Israel has no economic power anymore. I know we think it's powerful. I think the axis, I think they brought the Palestinians to where it is right now, but it's time for the GCC to take some economic control. And I think that's what we're leading to. I think the goal is to transform the Middle East for the first time since the Ottoman Empire, since the Brits carved it all up in Sykes-Picot in order to create death, destruction, and since the mob took over and took out JFK, and created this fake war on terror 2.0 that has led to so much death and destruction and divide and conquer and hatred and civil unrest and all the things it's caused. No more. This is mob activity. This is how they get their economic control. Let's let the Middle East, let's let the new model prevail. And all it requires is the model that the GCC have already put through. Remember, in the Bitcoin section, I said Abu Dhabi already invested in Binance. Qatar and Saudi Arabia, they're investing in AI. They're investing in America. They said their plan. I think the global elites, the proof of weapons network, they recognize that this was not going in the right direction. They act independently of the US. The Fed is not America first. The ECB is not Europeans first. The proof of weapons network that I covered in the macro section, they act independently and they're protecting their interests. And Bitcoin is the resistance. And that's why they're trying to accumulate Bitcoin. They couldn't beat us, so they joined us. They're like your VCs. They just go where the money is. They're like an entrepreneur that can hyper accelerate a company through your VC funding. They can create the next ChatGPT through VC funding. And I don't think the VC funding is going to where it is right now. And so the order is being changed. The proof of weapons network will do whatever's in their monetary interest, whatever the return on investment is. And you need to recognize that as well. I don't think the neocons are going to be as powerful as they used to. That power and that model is declining. Why? Because we got 10 years until AI determines what the next government is. We've got to make it decentralized. We can't have AI in centralized database in China and America like they both want. We have to build it on top of Bitcoin, as I said. We have to have decentralized. We have to have truth. The truth is coming out. These files are being released. The proof of weapons network is understood. I will continue covering it in Bitcoin Hard Talk. I'm not even going to bother going through any of the other wars and any of the other things. Just be aware that the whole narrative, remember those covert operations that I covered in here, the ones that do false flag operations to make you think that there's terrorism and fear. These are mechanisms of control for central bank digital currencies, technocratic stable coins. They are weapons for control, and you need to opt out. Debt is the gateway drug of control. Boycott by saving in Bitcoin and spend local. Don't prop up the technocratic control mechanism, surveillance state, AI as a genocide service that will be weaponized into your CBDC and your stable coin when it's controlled by a centralized server. Work decentralized. The people do have the power. We did it with Bitcoin. It was a miracle. That whole network was created because of us, because of the design of it. And now they have to join us. We can do that with AI. We can do that with social media. We can do that with identity. We can do that with stable coins. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Some are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. I'm going to keep exposing the system and make sure you are on the right side of the change. I want to do it with peace, love, and unity. And I don't think they want it to be that way. But with information, I think we can make that transition together. And I think we can do it with peace. That's going to do it for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 75. I know it was long. We'll break it up into a few. But if you want more people to know this, if you want peace, share, like, subscribe, and get more people to watch this and invest the time, because I think it's the most important thing that we can do. Peace.